And speaking of those games that happened on the field, we did have it feels like forever, but the national championship game just happened Monday, just a few days ago. It feels like forever with all this news coming out in terms of everything else that's going on in our college football world. But guys, there's a national championship game that happened just a few days ago. And we did see what happened in a national championship game. We saw Michigan win their very first national championship game since 1997. To give you guys some context for how long ago that was, last time Michigan actually won the national championship game, I was not alive. I was legitimately not alive. I was actually born a couple of months after the national championship game took place, but this is the first time since 1997 that Michigan did say that they are at the top of the sport, that they are currently at the pinnacle right now. Michigan did end up winning. It looks convincingly 34-13. I will say, though, that this is a type of game where the game overall was a little bit closer than what the final score would indicate in my mind. Now, if you watch the first quarter, quarter and a half, you didn't think that it was going to end that way because Michigan, and Michigan, to all the credit in the world to the Michigan Wolverines, they ran all over Washington in this one. And what Michigan was able to be more physical against an Alabama team that is used to being to out physical other squads. So Michigan beats them in an overtime game, and they use that same kind of logic for say in order to out physical Washington. And it was a huge discrepancy in how Michigan was able to run the ball versus how Washington was able to run the football. Michigan ends up running for over 300 yards. They average 8 yards a carry, by the way, while Washington struggled to even amass 50 yards. So they couldn't even get a six of what Michigan was able to accomplish on the ground. And a part of that is that Washington did not have their full arsenal in the running game. Dillon Johnson, who has had an excellent season, he ran for over 150 yards in the Pac-12 championship game, really helped propelled the Washington Huskies into the college football playoff in the first place, was a good supporting piece for Michael Penix. Well, he was limited. He was someone that got hurt in the Texas game, was a game time decision, actually did end up playing, but it was clear that he was not himself. He only averaged 3 yards a carry. He ran for 34 yards off of 11 carries in that national championship game. So Washington was absolutely bottled up, and they lost in the trenches. And that was evident in that first quarter and a half that Washington was frankly dominated. It was 17-3 at one point, but I do also have to give credit to this Washington squad. They never give up, even though it was seemed like that Michael Penix didn't necessarily have his fastball in this national championship game. Now, when we talked about this national championship game, I said that I figured Michigan would win, but I thought Michael Penix could at least keep it close. But for Washington to pull this out and win outright, Washington really needed Michael Penix to have the type of game that he had in, for example, the Texas game. And the stats that he put in that Texas game really don't do it any justice. Yes, he threw for over 400 yards and he threw for multiple touchdown passes. But what he also did was Michael Penix Jr. was making multiple off platform throws. He was making multiple intermediate completions. He was playing at an extraordinarily high level to get Washington in to this national championship game. And even then, it still almost was not enough. It came down to that very last play of the game where one of the DBs made an excellent play on the ball to help seal a Sugar Bowl victory for the Washington Huskies. And it's not that Penix had a terrible day. He did complete more than half his passes. He did throw for 250 yards. had a touchdown, but he threw multiple picks. Now, one of those picks was not his fault. The first pick that happened in the third quarter, first drive of the second half, by the way, and this was a real turning point in this game as well. You guys would remember he got pressured in the pocket. He couldn't step up. He tried to throw the ball away. He was going to make a good decision trying to throw that football away, and he couldn't get enough under it. And DBs for Michigan, all credit the world to those Michigan DBs who did their job. The Michigan DBs had to slow down this passing attack, and they did. They really did. Made a big play on the ball. And then fourth quarter, Penix desperately trying to get Washington back into the game, throws a second interception. There was also a big fourth down in that first half that Penix had Ndunze wide butt naked open as well. And it wasn't a perfect throw by any. It was catchable, but it's not the type of caliber throw that you would typically see from Michael Penix Jr. So he misses that throw. So those were really defining moments. And of course, eventually, Michigan does end up pulling away. They do end up getting 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And that ultimately seals Washington's fate. That's how Michigan ends up winning this national championship. One more thing that I do want to talk about before I talk into what could possibly happen with with all the things that's happening off the field for Michigan is JJ McCarthy didn't have to do much in this game at all. He only had 170 yards of total offense. He had a very modest stat line, if we're going to be honest here, right? So JJ McCarthy ends up going 10 for 18, 140 yards. He also carried the ball a few times, 4 times for 31 yards. And it makes you wonder, right? Just with what happened with Florida State. And I know some people already made this point already, but I definitely wanted to bring this up. So Florida State, who was an undefeated team, was kept out of the playoff because they were concerned about the quarterback play. But yet, Michigan just showed that you don't have to have necessarily elite play from the quarterback position in order to win a national championship. JJ McCarthy is the perfect example of that. Now, could have JJ McCarthy thrown the ball more times and maybe his stat line would look prettier? Sure. But I think one of the best traits that you could have as an offensive coordinator is sticking with what works. And if you're running the ball extremely well, it's kind of like the Penn State approach, right? In the Penn State game, particularly in the second half, JJ McCarthy did not even attempt a single pass in the entire second half. But Penn State really could not do anything to stop the run. It was the same thing with this Washington game. So you know that the run's working. Why would you get away from that? Why? There's no reason to do so. So shout out to that coaching staff with having a plan and executing that plan at an extremely high level. And listen, Florida State, I know some of you feel some type of way of not being in the playoff, but whether Florida State was in this playoff or not, doesn't change the fact that, Michigan earned this national championship, at least on the field. Now, off of it, I have no idea what the NCAA is going to do. I know it, you know it, we all know it, right? We know that the NCAA is very inconsistent with how it punishes teams. My early indicators say that there might not be any significant punishments. And for those of you that are preying on Michigan's downfall, you probably don't like this news, but don't take my word for it. One of the members of the NCAA said, quote, that Michigan won this national championship fair and square. Do I agree fully with that sentiment? To be honest, not necessarily. I think there needs to be some ramifications to what needs to happen with this Michigan team, and I'm sure it is a factor to why Jim Harbaugh wants to leave for the NFL, right? But I will say this, even if the wins ultimately end up being vacated, it doesn't change the fact that we saw what we saw. We saw Michigan go toe-to-toe with Alabama and out-physical Alabama. We saw Michigan go play Washington, and they handled their business against the Washington Huskies. So Michigan fans, I'm sure you're not complaining. And it hurts me to say this as someone that is an actual Ohio sports fan. You could see that right there. Like I grew up watching like Ohio State, and I've also like support Cincinnati. I am in that minority. I know that it is what it is. But congrats to Michigan for winning a national championship. Next year, our college football playoff, it's going to look a lot different. The path to the national championship is going to look significantly different. Instead of having that 4-team playoff that we've been used to seeing for the last decade plus, we're going to have 12 teams from here on out. And we're going to see teams get some automatic bids. Now, whether it's the 5 autos plus 7 at-larges or the 6 and 6, we'll have to wait and see. Right now, it is at 6 and 6, but there is an indication in light of the Pac-12 essentially folding that they would switch to a 5 and 7. So we'll see what happens from here on out, but it doesn't change the fact that I think Washington is going to be fine. I think they have their coach in Kevin DeBoer. If he doesn't take that Alabama job, I think Washington is going to be a very good addition to the Big Ten in 2024. And I feel like this will not be the last that we see Washington be in that hunt for a national championship. I just kind of have that feeling with the way that culture is really starting to come together over Kevin DeBoer.